appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. Pretty excited. We've got a really good group of panelists from the cybersecurity space. Let me start with you, Rosanna, ladies first. When we met in August, we talked about, there was a question, what are the three most important security measures that mid-market organizations should implement initially, right? Everybody pretty much to a T said it was password management or MFA, need to know your data security posture, make sure you have a disaster recovery plan in place and you're testing your backups. Has anything changed in the last 6 months?
I mean, all of those things are still equally as important. A new theme that we're seeing start to bubble up, and I think everybody on the panel would agree, is validating that our controls are working for us, right? One of the most important things in any cybersecurity program is visibility, right? How do I know when a vulnerability is being exploited? How do I know when a user makes an error? How do I know, all of I can give a million scenarios. How do we know when they happen, right? So we all spend our time educating on detection. You can do that through an EDR. You can do that through network visibility. You can do that through cloud integrations. That theme is never going to go away. But what we've had so much more of a focus on in the last handful of months is how are we validating that those services or products are being used the way that we think that they are? There's been a lot of, and not to blame anybody in marketing, but I think that this just happens sometimes, right? These products are marketed to be really easy. You put them in play and, great things are going to come of it. And that's true, but great things only come from products and even solutions and services when there's proper buy-in, there's proper roles and responsibilities. So I'd say that's going to be the theme that we spend most of our time talking about the next handful of months. It's just, we've got to invest. We need the right solutions. We need the right products, but most importantly, we need the right procedure. We need the right process to be able to say, these are doing what I expect them to do.
So set it and forget it doesn't work?
Unfortunately, no. I actually stumbled upon an analogy recently, and I don't know if it'll be a good one or it'll land, but I've been using it. It's kind of like the porridge, right? Can't be too hot, can't be too cold. You've got to be just right there in the middle. So a lot of us on the panel, we use commercial products as part of our solutions, right? Your EDRs are a great example. SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, market leaders, no one will fight you on that. But those products have to be the porridge for everybody. And our security posture can't accommodate for that, right? If you have a higher risk tolerance, maybe that's okay. But if you have a lower risk tolerance, you need to really be just in the middle.
Makes sense. Ryan, what are your thoughts? Anything you want to add to that?
I hate that every time I follow Rosanna, I feel like I'm always saying whatever she said. But again, she kind of highlighted some of the exact things that, I think, John, you and I have even had some conversations on. But, I think this is the reason why organizations like everyone sitting here on this panel exist is right around that thing. There's a saying I used to have when I was on the enterprise side that said, alert equals action. Don't send me an alert that you don't plan on me doing something with. And I think we talk to a lot of companies so often that we go, well, what are you doing with your XDR or your SIEM more often what they have at that time? And they go, oh, we don't even look at it anymore. But we check the box with compliance, but no one's looking at the alerts because there's just too many. And it's like, all right, well, then there's something wrong there. And so I think one thing that we're seeing is beyond what we were talked about before with just the password management, the MFA, and some of those components and taking what Rosanna said around policy and procedures is that's why organizations like Rosanna, Chris, Nima, myself, that's why we exist is let us take in all those components and let our policies and procedures and our teams handle a lot of that work. So I think it's that proof and that evidence. And one of the tools that we use a lot in our organization, and Rosanna, again, she kind of hinted on it, is vulnerability management. That there's actually tools that exist that don't get talked about nearly as often, that just look at your environment. They don't actively, big air quotes, protect your environment, but they're actively telling you where you may have threats. They're actively telling you where you may have configuration issues, missing patches, things like that. So one of the things I'm really telling my client is if you're going to manage this yourself, first off, I don't recommend it. Do you have all the policies alert equal action? For every alert you get, do you have a defined action? If you do not, then you're going to fail your organization. And let's start looking at ways to know proactively where those gaps exist, like vulnerability. So yeah, I think those are the two things I'd add from previous months.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And AI, typically plays into that a bit as well. Nima, are you seeing or are you guys using AI for any of those actions or to manage some of your alerts on your side for your MSP clients?
Yeah, we're seeing a pretty fair trend in terms of folks wanting to kind of move towards more kind of AI-centric things. I think what we've noticed over the last little bit is marketing has done a really stellar job of kind of putting AI as the magic sauce into everything. And so it's got a lot of really great promises. I was actually doing a session last week where we were talking a little bit about the AI piece, and what we've started to see is that more from the attacker side, they've been a little bit more effective, I think, at using the AI. What I'm still waiting for, though, is kind of what we're going to get to on the defensive side, where we're able to kind of more proactively identify the analytics around what's going on, and not just identify it, but put the automation in place where it's going to, kind of quickly immobilize things, change rule sets, and we can get into this kind of cyber warfare where it's all automated type of thing. So I'm still waiting for those days. Why I'm mentioning that is I think from a trending perspective, everybody's already starting to think about a lot of this stuff, and we've all got the right kind of concepts, but getting to that real world kind of implementation and getting a lot of solidity around it, I think has been challenging. There's a couple of new players that we're seeing pop through that I think there's a lot of good promise around it, but I don't know that we've gotten to the point just yet where it's gotten to the level of sophistication that I think we all expect.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we'll spend a lot of time on AI in a little while, a couple of questions around that. But going back to something Rosanna said in the first question was, the enterprise tools that you guys are using, right? She mentioned CrowdStrike, I think SentinelOne. We're seeing a trend with a lot more customers using Defender just as part of their overall stack. So, and I'll throw this one to you, Chris, do you see customers using Defender as a standalone product, and is that sufficient for what you're seeing?
Of course, you come to me with that when I got a ton loaded up for the first one, but I'm all good.
We can circle back on it if you want.
No, all good. Everything that everyone covered in there is great. With Defender, my short answer from what I see is no. I don't see anyone just using Defender. It's great, but there's so much more that I'm not biased against Microsoft. It works, it's great. But what I see a lot of customers, and from Lumen perspective, I'm just talking about my people, that when you have Defender, and now what do I do with it? What do I use to augment it when it comes to, Siemens Solar, and pulling in the telemetry, that's all great. But a lot of customers to us, I want more, because here's a prime example. I have Defender, but now what am I going to use for ZTNA? We do a lot of Fortinet. And so you've got, FortiClient that does all of these, wonderful things. And then you have that running alongside Defender. Trying to do it all with one, I don't see it.
Yeah, I would just echo, we're seeing a lot of requests for Defender today. So about a year and a half ago, and for those of you who don't know CyberMax, there's important context here. We created our own SOAR. So essentially with that, there has to be process, right? Any commercial agent can't just speak with it. The point of what I'm mentioning is we had a lot of requests about a year or so ago to incorporate Defender into the solution. What I'm about to say is 1000% a hot take, but I'm going to say it anyway. EDRs of all capacity fall off at some point in time. A really strong security program understands where those fall off, right? So none of us should put 100% trust in an S1, in a CrowdStrike, in a Defender, but that doesn't mean there isn't a place for it in our security programs. So we welcome Defender into the portfolio. We support it with our clients. But the caveat there is, let's make sure the licensing is right. Let's make sure the configurations that a client may be responsible for rather than a vendor, whereas, you may be bringing those products. That's the conversation that you have that's a little bit different, right? So just more of the overall strategy rather than saying no. I think what all of us would agree on is how do we work with it and then understand its efficiencies.
But we used it. Like I have Defender running, we have it running on our endpoints, but we also have CrowdStrike running. We also have CyberArk running for DLP. We also have Microsoft running for DLP as well. So blending all of these solutions for a mid-market business, it can get overwhelming. So I get why, hey, I've got Defender, why not use it? But then the integrations, it can be a little bit daunting for SMB, and that's where we see a lot of activity helping them manage all these tools.
If I can, Ryan, sorry, go ahead. Do you want to get in first?
No, let's go ahead.
Yeah, if I can, just to tack on a little bit, I think what we've been saying is really an interesting trend. And we've seen kind of folks fall into kind of two camps. So camp one is basically, I don't care. And then camp two is I have to be in the Microsoft stack. So in the I don't care camp, we can bring whatever kind of EDR that folks prefer. We generally kind of like CrowdStrike just because my joke with everybody is if it's good enough for the DoD, obviously it's good enough for your small business, right?
Sure.
Just to be kind of real candid about it. And then we see other folks that are in the Microsoft stack that are like, you know what, we really want to lean into the Microsoft stack even more. So they're not just kind of using Defender for endpoint, but they're really leaning into the entirety of the Defender suite, Defender for identity, Defender for cloud, and everything else. So we've primarily seen those two camps. I think, in terms of which one brings the best blend, it really just comes down to flavor and preference. I see a lot of times folks setting up some really excellent kind of dashboarding in both tools. So I think it really comes down to just personal preference and comfort level. And Ryan, sorry, I know you were trying to get in there too.
That's all right. Everyone had a lot to say on this one, so we'll all get our quick little rounds. So, couple of things from our end. We actually are seeing quite a few companies that are using the whole Microsoft suite. But to Rosanna's point, there's a couple of key things there. Just because it says you have Defender does not mean you have the right Defender. Defender P1 is not going to get you the coverage you need, whether we're talking about Defender Office 365, which does like spam filtering, Defender Endpoint, Defender for Identity. You got to be at the Defender P2 levels for those products to be useful. But to kind of where Nima was saying, what's been really nice is I can do a full identity access management strategy if you've got your Entra P2s, not Entra P1 again, but Entra P2s. We can use that for organizations that have maybe looked at Okta and said that's too expensive. We're able to actually take and build you a strategy around that, bring in that telemetry. And then one of the most important things I'll tell anyone, whether we're talking CrowdStrike, Microsoft, SentinelOne, firewalls, Fortinet, doesn't matter, is a poorly rated system configured correctly will outperform a great rated system configured poorly. So if being in that Microsoft shop and having that training and that single pane of glass is going to allow you to have better configuration, better management, and more accuracy, we actually are seeing from an ease of management, which going back to point one, the policies and procedures that you can control it matter a lot, and that does help there. But again, E3s aren't going to get it. E5s with a few add-ons is going to be there from a pricing standpoint, is going to allow you to do some business.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to turn down when you've got it baked in with the rest of the Microsoft stack. So I understand why customers are asking that. All right, let's turn a little bit to some of the threats that you guys are seeing, right? We had this question 6 months ago. What were you seeing at that time as the most pressing threats? And a lot of it was around social engineering. We know that's always going to be our biggest vulnerability, but what are you guys seeing trending right now? I guess let's start with you, Nima, on this one.
Yeah, thanks, John. The big thing that we have seen a pattern of behavior on is the attackers are going after VPN access that doesn't have MFA enabled on it. So once they're throwing password sprays at everything they can, and then once they do, they get into the network, and then they're immediately doing. There's kind of a simple pattern that we've seen, which is once they get their privileged access, they're basically trying to harvest other credentials that they can get to. And then they're going after the backups because they don't want you to be able to recover. And then we see the follow-on with the ransomware. So, why I'm mentioning that is it's really key to have a good security operations center in place that can quickly kind of identify those things and immobilize or get the backups offline or somewhere else so that you can do it very, very aggressively. But again, I see that kind of regular pattern kind of coming in. VPN access with no MFA, get credentials, harvest them, and then go for ransomware after they get the backups out of the way.
Chris, I'm going to come back to you on this one. What are you guys seeing? I know you've got a lot of resources in the Luna portfolio there.
Yeah, the two big ones: third party exposure, and then cloud vulnerabilities. The things that you see in the news. Okay, third party exposure. Ask Bybit what they think about. How important is it? I've got to know that if I'm using a product from someone, that product is secure, and if I can't verify that, I mean, you can't do everything, right? But being able to look at what do I have in my own sort of supply chain to make sure that those products and services are secure. Then cloud vulnerabilities, it's it's huge. I mean, I see a lot of activity now around not just cloud security posture management, but data security posture management. Securing the data, knowing where it's at, is a huge thing for people to get their arms around. You know, you can have the best, BCDR policy in the world. It looks great in a binder, but if you don't, here's the big one: test your backups. How about that? I mean, you can have. I've got these backups. I've never tested them. I can't recover from a ransomware attack. And then the other thing, just real quick, the trend is now, if you look, criminal gangs are moving away from ransomware. There's no need to have to worry about getting the payload in there and ransoming the data. I'll just take the data and threaten you. It takes, they go where the money is, and that's the quickest way to get money instead of going through. They'll still go through the other steps if they can, but they don't have to.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't do it if it didn't work, right?
Right.
Rosanna, what are you seeing? What are you trending in? And then, I guess maybe tie it back to what is the impact of businesses that are being impacted by it?
Yeah, I would echo, most of the points that were made. We're seeing pretty consistently. There's another thing that I would imagine will continue to emerge. That would be SEO poisoning. So those of you who don't know what that is, obviously hacker groups, threat actor individuals can sponsor pages on Google, right? So their infected site can rank high up on, from an SEO perspective. It can be the first thing that you click on. We as a SOC actually proactively caught recently a pretty significant one. I'll tell you that story in a second, and I'll tell you why it's important as well. But this is not just about things that we would deal with on the day-to-day from an IT perspective that I'm about to share with you. Our team actually has quite a bit of research that we do into this. And if you look it up, these hacker groups are sponsoring all sorts of sites. Like, for instance, I think the number one site that was clicked on was about Maine Coon cats, right? First of all, I didn't know what they were until this conversation, but they're large cat breeds, right? The point of this is it's not the story that I'm about to tell doesn't just impact IT. It impacts us as a business, because you can have one person looking up, a new cat they found out about, right? And we as a security practitioners need to have a security program that accommodates for all types of threats, especially with individuals that are less experienced and don't know better. The practical example that I think we all would like to hear is we had a client of ours, and honestly, I don't fault them for this. They needed to put a form of Adobe. They needed to add it to their image. So someone from their team, they had an IT team of, let's say, 4 people. I don't know if this person was junior or not. And he said, oh, got to add Adobe to the image. Google, download, there we go. A few weeks went by, they got a new round of hires, they set up the system, they all of a sudden machine 1, boom, we started to see detections. We saw a number of different things, enumeration of the network, all the things that should never happen, especially on a new computer. So we'd reached out to our client, we said, hey, this thing is going on, right? We stopped it, we caught it, we know what's happening here. The client's first reaction was, whoa, we bought a hacked computer. No, false, right? A mistake was made in setting up the configuration there. Now, here's the mission critical piece. It could have been just that detection. We could have figured it out and we could have closed that out. It wasn't until we did that deeper dive did we find out that it was added to the image. That every time they set up a new system, they ran the risk of reinfecting themselves. So why I give you guys this as an example is that's a very technical nuance, but there's also the same exact threat that's impacting us on a day-to-day user level. So our security program has to accommodate for the technical as well as the non-technical, and most importantly, a way to figure out how quickly these things are occurring before damage can happen. If any security practitioner ever tells you that, they'll stop all your attacks, buy this thing, put it in play, it won't happen to you. That's right. Run away screaming. But how do we figure out that middle ground, right? Of preventing as much as possible, detecting what we can, but more importantly, having that practice to be able to recover. That's a strong team. That's strong configurations, to Ryan's point. It's not just the tech. So that's certainly what we're seeing. And if that wasn't detected, who knows what that could have led to, right?
It's a lot of investment too, though, right? I mean, to be able to support the number of people, the tools that are needed in order to support that.
But it doesn't
Ryan,
doesn't have to be.
Okay.
So Rosanna brought up a great point. okay, these are technical controls, right? Well, if you had a policy to put in administrative controls that whenever, you have a base image, have that audited. There needs to be a policy in place to take a look at it and say, okay, we got,
Change control. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and I understand that sometimes, when you talk with about these things, because they're not sexy, the customer is going to say, okay, great, I'm going to put in another policy and, put in whatever administrative control, checks and balances, change control board. Yeah, that doesn't sound great, but where it looks great is when you can show when something does happen that, hey, we had this policy in place and here's where it failed. This person didn't do this. Not that it's finger pointing, but it is finger pointing, I'm not trying to get somebody fired, but what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to protect the business as a going concern.
Yeah, it's critical. Brian, what are you guys seeing? I mean, I know you guys are doing incident response. What are you having to resolve?
Yeah, it's so funny you kind of bring it up that way, because as they told the stories, I'm pretty sure everyone saw me grinning and nodding my head. We've got 3 breach remediation and forensics investigations going on right now for people who didn't have any protection ahead of time. They were not using a CyberMac. They were not using Illumins. They weren't using us. They, or a data prize. They were using nothing. And so now they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And as they gave the examples, the VPN example, we have a client, their developers are all located in India, and they're located here. And one of the employees on the VPN, his computer was compromised, and they ended up getting his VPN credentials, got into the environment, and started doing lateral movement with the developer's access. They found out, because they had no detections, they found out when the guy crashed their website. And so when their website went down is when the first notice that they had that someone was in the environment, right? And now what are they going to do? And they go, well, we used a VPN. And it's like, I'm sorry to tell you that they were able to take that and use that elsewhere, and you have that vulnerability. You talk about people clicking and putting things into images, not quite the same, but someone downloading bad content. We had another one where that's exactly what they did, but even worse, the customer who hired us did it in their customer's environment. They were hired to go put something in their customer's environment, clicked on a link very similar to the Adobe story, and put it into their environment, and then they had to hire us to go fix, that component, which lays into what Chris had said earlier about third-party vendor management, right? Is paying attention to the access you're giving your clients. My favorite thing when we get into any new client is they immediately go, we want to create an account just called Simply Meta at, and give you global admin privileges. And the speed at which my team goes, no. And we run in and go, don't dare do that. Right? You want to give the right level of access to the right level of things when needed, not God level access to everything all the time. So instead of adding something new to the list, guys, everything they told you, if you heard anything that they just said and went, that's not possible, I will give you a real case example that we've done with some sort of forensics or remediation where a company got an alert and didn't pay attention, didn't have a change control policy, had a VPN without MFA, whatever you want to pick, social engineering. I can give you examples because we spend more time doing those types of remediations and investigations than I think that, it's amazing how many of those we're doing. So I just wanted to highlight those are real examples, real cases affecting real businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I didn't hear, and I'm sort of surprised, was anything specific to AI. So threats that are trending that are AI generated or AI impact.
I would say that they're not doing new attacks.
Impact?
I would say it's not new types of attacks, John. It's just now being done by AI. So it's a great example. We're seeing highly more targeted social engineering phishing campaigns being written and managed by AI. But it's the same attack vector, it's the same attack components. And we were looking at this on one of those kind of vector charts. You go, it's the same thing. We've just added AI. So it's not that there's a lot of new vectors and new methods because of AI, but that the ones that exist have become far more specifically built or far more intelligent because of the AI component. And I think that's maybe why you didn't see it, but I'll let everyone else kind of chime in.
Yeah, you bring up a good, excellent point on that one. Yeah, the attacks are the attacks, but the quality, especially with phishing, we all know that one. No longer can you just look for poor grammar or misspellings. The quality's gone up, and then the speed at which the campaigns are developed and the speed at which they change is what is at the risk of hyperbole, staggering. Because what you detected 3 hours ago has changed. Email filters are pretty good, but it's still the number one vector of attack. It's still the one that most people, are susceptible to, because there is no guardrail in place against sending email still,
Sure.
believe it or not.
Yeah, I would say average, when we think about that same thing, the average breach detection time used to be, if we all remember a couple of years ago, 200 days, right? Enter automated ransomware, enter, these more sophisticated types of attacks. I think that timeline has significantly reduced, but what can we do about it, right? I think that's really where we need to drill into. So our
I don't
training
think you can do anything about it from the attacker perspective. If I want to craft new malware to evade signatures, it takes no time now and no skill to obfuscate the code. And
no skill for sure.
Yeah, keep it changing.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to disagree with you there. I would just say that, us as businesses need to do something to accommodate for that, right? So that's the missing piece in a lot of these conversations. So
I think that leads into
Go ahead.
I think that leads into one of the things that, John, I'm sure is a completely different question, but since you brought up AI again, and it's such an important conversation, Rosanna, you brought up your SOAR earlier. All the organizations here on this call have some sort of a SOAR. That is where you're going to see that AI. It's not the front-facing fun, to Chris's point. It's not the sexy components, but the SOAR is that area where we're really going to be able to take machine learning and AI and teach it how to adapt faster, right? And it's that whole, I think Nima said, AI versus AI is the direction we're headed. And a lot of that, John's not going to push from those end components in XDR and the EDR, although it will be used. It's going to be when we combine all that telemetry inside of that SOAR component inside of these organizations. And can we teach the SOAR to learn these new things fast enough? And that's going to be where that component is as far as the development of AI is going to be. We got to get the SOAR to develop quick enough, learn fast enough, and see enough data to make those decisions.
Who's winning that war right now?
Yeah, everyone waited to answer that one.
Yeah.
I got to lean towards the bad guys. I mean, they're still beating it. We're still seeing a lot of things that shouldn't be. Obviously, that we're never going to be 100% secure. That's not going to ever be the case. But I still think we're seeing a lot of just what I'll call sloppy issues that are allowing them to, the threat actors to win. If I had to say who's winning the war right now, I don't think it's by a landslide one way or the other, but I think the bad guys are definitely outrunning us in the development of new techniques and new components way faster than we're sealing them up.
Yeah, you're right, because the good guys, we're focused on ethics. We're worried about controlling what the AI, the LLMs generate as far as content, and making sure that it's not biased, that it's not racially insensitive and or just straight up hate speech. They're focused on making AI friendly. Bad guys don't have to care about that. They don't, and if anything, they don't want it. And so you see jailbroken models, that they're using to create this code, create these campaigns where they don't have to do. They don't care. They're bad guys.
Yeah, the other side of it too, though, is when we think about just overall cybersecurity, hackers, bad guys have to get it right once to be successful per company. We have to get it right 100% of the time. And there's no such thing as 100% when it comes to security. So we've got to go back to that balance again, right? We need to prevent. We need to detect. We need to have the right posture to be able to accommodate for all of these different nuances. But we also, as businesses, have to wake up and realize the same way we have a business strategic plan, we need a cybersecurity strategic plan. And those things have to be in line with one another's expectation. We're not going to grow in revenue if a cyber event happens. We're not going to open up our new office if the cyber event happens, right? These things impact top line, but impact everything across the business. So we as good guys are losing in the sense that we don't have the strategy, but the bad guys, they're utilizing immature tactics and they're still successful because there's too many people running the slowest. So I think that's really the focus area.
You bring up a good point there that, and again, back to administrative controls, yeah, you gotta get it right. But if you look at it from the cyber kill chain perspective, I got 17 opportunities where I could stop an attack. I don't have to have everything in my entire environment correct, and they only have to be right once. I can make it much more difficult for an attacker to be successful. Yeah, you may have initial access, but I'm going to stop you from lateral movement. That's a very, very basic example, I know. But when it comes into, looking at how do I implement these technical controls, that's where it comes back to administrative controls.
Mhm.
Just to kind of weigh in on this a little bit. I agree that from the AI perspective, the attackers have a slight edge right now, and I agree with some of the other comments that have been made. And I think part of what's happening is that the good guys are struggling a little bit with what level of automation and handover do we do to the AI, right? So you've got attackers leveraging it in a way that, to the point they don't really care kind of what happens because it's not their problem. Whereas we're trying to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way that we go about protecting things. So I agree with that. I do disagree a little bit though with one of the points that got brought up around, we can't do anything about it. I think the more that we do to effectively kind of help train users, I think it's going to help us with getting a better alerting and better understanding. And if you're kind of doing, if you're generally practicing good hygiene, it's not that the attackers can't get in, right? But the likelihood that they're going to come in and waste, and I mean genuinely waste, a 0 day on a medium to small business instead of going after a large entity or a bank or government is pretty slim. I'm not saying that they won't do it. I'm saying that it's going to be a pretty slim margin. They're generally going to reserve those types of attacks for more sophisticated environments. So I disagree a little bit with the we can't do anything about it. I think again, if we're practicing good hygiene, we're training users, they're identifying things, we've got MFA in place, we're putting the right levels of automation and detection. I don't really see them, not being able to kind of you know ward off the majority of these types of attacks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
leaning into that just a little bit. One of the questions that came in from one of our attendees when we asked earlier this week was, how can organizations foster a strong cybersecurity culture among their employees and reduce the human-related security risks? So, what are maybe your top two things that organizations can do to help make sure they have that strong culture? We'll start with you, Nina.
Yeah, from my lens, I think the first thing is I like to gamify it, right? Like let's set it up and let's have a friendly, pick your favorite departments, right? Let's have finance square off against HR, who squares off against operations, against sales, like whatever the thing is. Because what happens is it gets the leadership team kind of more actively engaged. And when we do it properly, what you do is you get the different leaders razzing each other and saying, oh, well, Ryan beat me last week, but I'm going to get him this week. Like we're going to like getting that kind of encouragement kind of, I think is a big part of it. And then the second part of that is just the positive reinforcement, right? Giving awards, not just like, hey, my department beats yours, but also give folks awards, give them a Starbucks card or give them some little, tchotchke, or like, we used to do little security coins that says, I'm the security MVP or whatever it is. I think those things go a long way, and people hang them on their desk like they're proud of it, like it's a big deal for folks. And I think getting the excitement around it, I think is what makes a big difference from my lens.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
I think it's just going to concur with what he said, but at the end of the day, it's like any other thing that's negative that you want to get rid of in the world, whether it's a presidency, a disease, or whatever else. It's education and awareness, education and awareness. And the problem with education in this space is, and I hate to say this, it sounds a little bad about some of the employees, but a lot of the employees, they just go to work to make a check, and to the point, they don't genuinely come in and go, I care about keeping this secure. So Nima's correct. The only way to help with some of that education awareness is to give them something that they, as a selfish employee or as an individual employee and contributor to the business, something that matters to them and that helps, feels like it's more directly to them. I absolutely agree with that. And I also think that leadership in enterprise organizations, right, when you're using organizations like anyone on this call, we are always asking the proactive question and making proactive things. I think one of the other issues that you run into, both with employees and the previous question around just how do you stay protected is most enterprise organizations are looking at a specific thing going, how do I protect from that? Not how do I protect from things coming up in the future? They go, I want to protect that. And the amount of times that I get asked about, hey, Ryan, can you give me a solution that solves this? And I go, well, what are you doing about everything? What's your entire cybersecurity structure? Like, no, I don't want to talk about that. I want to solve this. And I think we have the same problem within user education is we want to educate them on that one thing, that thing we saw the other day versus, guys, let's really get into what's going to happen in the organization and the threat. If you click on that, that ransomware and you understand the impact it has again, it's that awareness and education that you have to find a way to get people engaged and participating.
You got to make it personal, right? I think
Yeah.
so many businesses made the mistake of, people are scared, right? They clicked on something, they did something they feel like they shouldn't have. They're scared to say something because they don't want to be embarrassed.
Mhm.
They don't want to be fired. They don't want to be written up. When in reality, that creates the opposite problem of no communication. And then we, as the good guys, don't have the opportunity to get ahead of it, right? Chris mentioned the kill chain before. Yeah, there's plenty of chances, but you want to see it as early as possible. And good communication with our users is important there. The other piece is making sure that they know who to talk to, right? If you go to an MSP's help desk compared to an MSSP SOC with the same exact issue, I bet you $1 million that they're going to take different steps to troubleshoot that. Neither one are wrong, they're different specialties. So when our users are having something happen to them, we need to make sure that it gets to the right people as quickly as possible. We ask the right questions and we make the right changes so we don't end up there again. I'd say that's probably the missing piece from a culture perspective. But the other side of it is it's, of course the emotional part is important, but I don't know that every user really understands the lines between their corporate life and their personal life are gone, right? People are getting social engineering events from their personal world quite significantly. And we need to make sure that our workforce and our users understand you don't have that level of privacy that you expected to have in the past. You got to be a steward to yourself, to your own bank account, to your best practices personally, the same way as you are professionally. So just more of that education in a way that hopefully, Ryan, they do care about, because you're right. We all can say how important security awareness training is, but unless it's important to that individual, they're click until they get to the end. And we don't want that, right?
Hey,
Yeah,
just
changing culture comes from the top. You have to have buy-in from senior management. Like here at Lumen, we're a large enterprise, right? We got a lot of employees. And so, when we last year rolled out the security awareness program, I mean, we have to do it every year. And then we do phishing tests throughout the year, things like that. But, it was the directive of senior management that we're going to change the culture to a security aware culture, all of our folks. And what the kind of campaign is security starts with you. This is why it's important. This is what you need to do, as an individual. And why is it, and, make it important to the end user, show them their part in it, that, hey, not only are you helping, the company, but you're helping yourself as well. Like what Rosanna mentioned, in your personal life, if you're aware of the importance of security at work, you got a pretty good chance that you might pass that on to your, to the folks at home, to your friends, and then now you're a security champion and wear that like a badge of honor. The whole thing that used to be with security awareness was carrot and stick, right? Hey, you got dinged because you clicked on this, and then no before. That was their thing. Hey, now we're going to evolve it into, like Nima said, gamifying it, and then also show you that, hey, this is what you should have done. These are the things that you should have looked for. I mean, security awareness training, as much as it does, a lot of folks do it, let's call it what it is, because they need to check the box for compliance, and let's just get through it. I'm guilty of of it going through. Okay, I've done this 1,000 times, but when you recognize the importance of it, because it's all in the news, it's in the news all the time today. You don't have to be that person. You can help someone else. I think that's when people really start to embrace it.
Yeah, I agree. Just a quick clarification, Rosanna, you used MSP and MSSP. I just want to make sure everybody on the call understands those acronyms. So can you define those for us?
Absolutely. So managed service provider, generally, they would be working from a help desk perspective, day-to-day operational. From an MSSP, that would be managed security service provider. Some are both, and there's strengths obviously in doing that. But when you think of a security escalation, we may treat things quite differently than we would with a system just acting funny, right? So those are important considerations to be made. By the way, they're both the right steps. However, both of those steps should be taken simultaneously, and those teams should have that communication with one another.
So Nima, you guys are both an MSP and an MSSP. So just quickly, anything you'd add there?
No, I think Rosanna covered it. Yeah, it's mainly just security versus the other pieces. So
perfect. All right. Well, guys, you talked about it, and Chris, you brought it up. I think Rosanna, you brought it up as well. you know, companies need to invest in order to be able to, manage the threats that are out there today. And everyone has budget after an event, right? But what threats or what are the trends that you're seeing in cybersecurity procurement in Q1 2025 versus maybe what we were seeing last year or the year before? Manima, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, the big thing that I've seen a lot of is we're seeing a lot of like kind of cost optimization and kind of sensitivity around pricing. So we've seen a lot of folks come in and go, well, how can I combine my services, or how can we reduce costs? And I think what I'm seeing is like there's just a feeling, right or wrong, right now that there's some degree of uncertainty out in business. And so because of that, they're really trying to be thoughtful about optimizing things and figuring out kind of how can we get the best value, for what we're trying to get.
Anybody see
I think
anything?
from my side, I'm seeing a lot of identity access management. It used to be people going back to something I had said earlier, and I think some of the others did too, about just buying point products. Used to be, can you give me MFA? Can you give me SSO? I'm now really seeing some people really take the concept of going, I need an entire strategy of how I manage my employees' identity and access into components instead of just buying these individual products. So we've seen a lot of push. Again, that goes back to why I said we've seen a lot with Microsoft with the intra P2s and taking advantage of that versus doing it outside like an Okta or a Jump Cloud or something, one of those types of solutions that exist out there. And so I think I'd add that finally I'm seeing organizations really go, this is its own entire architecture, just like we have our WAN diagrams and WAN architecture. Identity access management is its own entire strategy and architecture, and we've seen a big push on that in the last at least 3 months.
Do you feel like budgets are loosening up in the security space, though, specifically, or companies are prioritizing those efforts, or is it still if we have to? What do you think, Rosanna?
I think it's a larger conversation, right? So we're seeing, and I guess back to the previous question, I'm seeing a lot of folks realizing we might have been double spending, or we might have been having products in one direction and services in another, and maybe the services couldn't incorporate with the products. So what I'm seeing is more so of an ownership perspective, realizing we've got a lot of spend. Is it the right spend, right? So some of the situations that we're seeing is that security budget, let's just say, for example, maybe those dollars aren't going down. It might be the same spend, but they're reallocating how they're doing it. So to Ryan's point, like identity and access management is probably one of the hottest buttons that we've been talking about. Cloud security, right? It's a big conversation to have. Everybody invested in these cloud resources. They invested in additional products and technology, but they were many point solutions. Now I'm seeing, or I think we're all seeing, the consolidation of those. But more importantly, people are raising their hand to say, I'm not going to have this internal team, right? Not because we don't have strong people, but 1, 2, 3, 4, even, 5 or 6. We deal with mid-market, we deal with enterprise. And I think those alone are realizing we can't have a siloed security program. So how do we have that overarching champion? How do we bring visibility, and how do we tackle all these buckets we want to, but do it in a way that's cost effective for us? I'd say, I don't know if that directly answered your question, but that's the real thing that I feel we're seeing quite a bit of.
I think it does. Chris, you guys work across a lot of different areas. Are you seeing, more spend in the security space in certain areas versus others?
Yeah, I mean, really, procurement of talent is where we see a lot of movement. I've seen it specifically in the first quarter. So I've had folks come to us and say, look, we have, this technical control, we have this SIM, this SOAR, but we don't have the people anymore to be able to manage it. And so, we have Lumina has both a managed SIM and a VSOC solution. So managed SIM is the platform, VSOC is the people. So procuring talent, yeah, it's been hard in the security space for a long time, depending on who you ask. There's millions of unfilled jobs, and I could go on about that, but I won't. I mean, I think part of that problem is the dearth of talent that you hear about is because we look for the wrong people. The requirements are too high for entry level positions. There's no reason that a tier 1 SOC analyst needs to have 5 years of experience in a CISSP. That ain't going to happen. But when someone wants to, procure talent, we do staff augmentation also, but most of the time, when we talk about that, it's a consultative practice, and it's not always that's that easy of a process getting a person. But if you use our personnel to man whatever technical solution you have, it tends to go much better, because we have the talent that have cut their chops, made their bones, so to speak, on our network, on defending us, which is obviously a huge job. The other one I see from a procurement perspective is software. Customers coming to us and saying, "Hey, I don't want all these Splunk licenses. I don't want to have, all these CrowdStrike licenses. What can you guys do?" And so with that, we work with the customer and the vendor to procure the licenses.
Makes sense.
Pretty straightforward, but not that that exciting. But that's what I'm seeing in the first quarter.
Yeah. So a quick question, I guess, direct that we got from one of our participants. And I'll direct this to you, Rosanna, because I know you guys have some uniqueness around this. But what are the top three reports that boards of directors want to see in cybersecurity?
Good question. So a couple different things I would say. First, I think we all have to get on the same page with that is not the audience to take technical information to. Again, many of them might have the experience with it, but it's very hard to make future state decisions based on current situations, right? So I'll speak in terms of, the board for most of our clients that we have. Very similar to Ryan's point of like, you don't want a product for today, you want a product for tomorrow. They need to be making their decisions not based on the threats they're faced with today, the threats of tomorrow and thereon after. So some of the things that is helpful for those folks is, how does our overall security program drive change for us as a business? What are we doing how are we reducing our alerts? How are we understanding customizations that may need to happen for us, right? So I think most of us will go through an onboarding phase with our clients where, our first 30 days will be validation, verification. Should this happen? Why is this happening? Did you know there's a better mousetrap for that, right? To reduce that, the alerting there. But I'd say once you do that, I think the next fast follow from every board is, how are you keeping up with it? How are you, keeping up with the Joneses is a really real thing from a business perspective. It's a significant thing from a security perspective. So as that business goes through any sort of change, as they bring on a new product, as they bring on a new provider, as they bring on a new third party, or their cyber insurance changes, right? We're seeing a lot of question from the board of, make this practical for me. So they're looking for risk reduction in terms of reporting with alerts, vulnerabilities, things of that nature. They're looking for overall strategic conversation. But what we're seeing more now than I'm excited about it than we've ever seen in the past is they're asking the right questions to say, what do I need to be considering next? And it's not, what do I need to be buying next, right? We'd all love that, but it's not the case. It's what are those things that are bubbling up? What are those trends? How do we stay ahead of the curve? And how do we make sure our business is getting to that point? So distilling that technical information is important, but coming to the table with real examples as to how they can improve from a strategy perspective, I'd say is the most important piece.
I think tying it to outcomes too, as you said at the beginning there, I think is huge. Nima, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the three things that I generally tend to see is, the first is that they want that strategy and roadmap, right? Like, what are we doing? When are we doing it? That kind of first view. The second view that I'm seeing a lot of is they want a composite kind of risk assessment, and basically, how does the things in the strategy and roadmap tie to the risks, and how are we kind of buying them down or fixing them, reducing them? And then the third is just general, cybersecurity performance and metrics. Like, how are we actually doing? Something that's, and I don't mean like, again, I agree with Rosanna 100%. This is not the technical audience here, but like, if you give them hard numbers, like, again, I like CMM type of models where, like, okay, and I'm making up numbers here just for argument's sake, we were at a 2.0 in 2023, we were at a 2.5 in 2024, and now in 2025, we're at 3.2, right? it makes the conversation a little bit easier to kind of understand. So I think that's something that's pretty significant for folks. Those three is where I would tend to focus.
I think just to add to that initial thought I had, is they want to know where they're wrong, right? This never
Sure.
used to happen, but they want their partners to push back on them, right? You can have a great solution, but if you're taking too long to answer alerts, maybe you're not having that best solution because there's that dwell time there that you're artificially creating. So I think that they're looking for some challenge that I'd say over the last handful of years didn't exist.
Do you think business owners are getting it, that they know that there are gaps, there are going to be gaps, and they are focused on filling them?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, close it out. We're getting close on time, and I don't want to stand between everyone and their drinks. Ryan, we've got a lot of customers that are coming to us for AI projects, different areas. We've got, just off the top of my head, we've got projects around some Microsoft Copilot that we're working on. We've got projects around, custom software solutions or augmentations to software solutions. When we talked about this 6 months ago, data governance was what everybody was talking about. Is it any different today? And are there any specific, best practices that you can, bring to bear or highlight here?
We're still seeing a lot of the same problems. Another incident that we just dealt with was a client who thought he had the great idea of just going on and flipping on the switch and turning on all Copilot features just one morning. And within about an hour, he found out that he had opened up and started showing people all sorts of customer data and other customer data and things like that, because again, it's that data and governance point. But I think one of the things I didn't highlight so well last time when I talked about this, and I don't remember anyone else kind of getting into it, is data governance is not just something where we write down and go, this is private data, this is public data, or something very basic like that. Again, it's an entire policy and procedure that needs to be reviewed, needs to be looked at, that we talk about as we create data, that we also have to provide evidence around. So whether that evidence is things like your DLP solutions, whether that's Microsoft, a third-party DLP, Palo has DLP, Fortinet has DLP. So there's a lot of different network-based. Cato, I know, is in the portfolio. They have DLP. So there's a lot of solutions out there. But I want to just kind of highlight the data governance is not this thing where you just write a policy. It goes, if it's PII, then you do this. If it's not, you can just go nuts and have fun. It's a complete strategy that has to be put together and looked at for those. But that is still probably one of the biggest issues from a security stance that we're running into with AI, is around what data we're putting into it and what it makes visible. And how you can kind of, if you're wanting to get that data, how you can kind of find your way in the middle of what's happening and bypass some of your own internal like hierarchical folder rules, because you can get the AI to give it to you. So really going in and making sure that we're looking at a DLP and data governance inside of the AIs that we're deploying is absolutely still one of the biggest things that we're dealing with when we look at any sort of AI project, whether it's things like, contract creations or Copilot, Llama. It doesn't really matter which platform we're using it on. Big component still.
The 1 minute version, Nima, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I think Ryan generally covered it. I don't think there's anything kind of, I'm going to go with where we started the conversation, what he said. So.
All right, Chris, any last words?
Yeah, with governance, the people, who is the data owner, who's the data custodian, and what are they doing with the data? Have that in place, and for your governance is people.
Absolutely.
Rosanna, we started with you. I want to end with you. Anything?
Yeah, I would just say ask for help, right? I think that's what most businesses need to find, a strong sounding board. Sounding boards don't always charge you money, but they're a great person that you can run ideas by, and they can either validate or they can say, maybe not. So that's the message that I'd like to
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate everybody taking the time. I think there's a lot of information, a lot of good information. I think we could keep going for a long time. There's probably 50 questions we got from customers we didn't get a chance to get to. So, but I appreciate everybody participating. Hopefully everyone got good information out of this. Obviously, all of the individuals that are here on the call today are experts that we have in our portfolio of companies that we work with. So if you saw something or heard something today that, triggered a question, or you want to have a further discussion, please let us know. We can pull these resources in. We can talk about your opportunity or your use case specifically. and see how we can help.